Hello, good morning.
Yes.
My name is Jerome Kuseh. I'm here with Nanaya Asante, and we are bringing you a special discussion on the upcoming elections in Ghana. And today we'll be looking at what issues we think are going to be the most important in deciding the outcome of the and where we think each political party stands on that issue. To begin, I'm going to ask Nanayao to give us a bit of a background, starting from 2016. Why do you think the MPP won such a resounding victory, and what do you think the expectations for them coming into government were?
Yes. Thank you so much for this padded question, but I'll try to be snappy since we have like 40 minutes. I think essentially in 2016 there was a great wave of change. There was this innate desire for the average Ghanaian to want to see change in governance. It had piled up. I think Ghanaians had had enough of so many failed promises, and I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the doomsday crisis that um, they tried to solve, but lost track of how to approach the whole solution. Essentially, it's like you had a poison drink and all you did was add more water to it, thinking that the more water you add to the poison drink, it was going to dilute it to make it safe. That is, in essence, how I would summarize the doom. So how they were able to solve the doom? So because we essentially had the power crisis and we just kept adding on PPAs upon PPAs upon PPAs, and then they kept adding on installed capacity, and then the generating capacity was still not enough and all that. So this one coupled with bad economic metrics as well as unemployment, all these things. And there was this sense of, if I should put it in quote, the politicians have this sense of arrogance and invincibility that sought to exhibit itself during the latter part of 2012, 2016. And so all these things also sort of made the Ghanaians yearn for change. I think the opposition too, at that time, did an excellent job at painting the existing government, not the existing government itself, but the leader was a main target for the opposition, and they succeeded. They succeeded successfully in having everybody understand that this particular man was not fit for the purpose that he sits in. Because if you look at the victory and then the amount of votes they won by, it was very resounding. That it had not happened in this country before. It was, I mean, you can talk about 2000, but in 2000, the difference was that we were coming in from a 20-year transition period where Jerry Rawlings was inside there. We can look at it as 9 years or 8 years because of the 1992 elections. But if you look at it entirely, it was more like this whole 29 years that he had been in power. And so, yes, that change was different as compared to 2016 because this is 30 years and everybody had seen over and over. This is just 8 years in power. But I think the last 4 years, well, there was a lot of issues, some of which I've tried to outline because of a short period. So yeah, I think that in itself, and also the opposition's key message of free secondary high school, that was a game changer. Not and their parliament their vice presidential candidate, he had grown to become a fine politician from 2008. And if you look at 2008, you watch him speaking. You look at 2000, watch him speaking. Between 2012 and 2016, he had matured in the art of politics. He knew how to give the correct punches, the jabs. He knew how to, in boxing, they call it rubber dog dodge. And he just dismantled the whole governance structure in 2016. He was a very key. I could actually bet and be bold enough to say 10% of the votes they got, or maybe 15%, was just by the efforts of Bawumia. So yeah, in essence, that's how I'll put the summary.
That's a very good summary of what happened. I think I agree with most of what you said. But having won such a resounding victory, that could mean, apart from just the failures of the government at the time, it could mean there was a lot of expectations on the government. And that is a double-edged sword, because you come in with high expectations, it means you are going to be held to very high standards. And then you can't come and use too much of an excuse of, oh, we are bad, but the past government was much worse, because people are expecting much better from you. So looking at those expectations, from the perspective of the voter, what do you think a voter, your ordinary average voter looking from 2016 to 2020, what do you think their perception of how well the government has done will be like right now?
You see, we've moved from 1987, 1990s. We are now, the average Ghanaian is not the marginalized, the impoverished Ghanaian. We are not a two-dimensional character anymore. The kind of two-dimensional characters you see in a UNHCR, United Nations fundraising appeal. The average Ghanaian now has what we call thoughts, opinions, and agencies. For me, I feel like whatever government policies you put in place, it should directly translate to monies in the pocket of the average Ghanaians. Because if you look at Maslow's theories of needs, there are only three things that a human being wants: is food, shelter, and then I think the other one. Now, these are their primary concerns. If you are able to give them these three things, you have performed. Now, what I would also say is that going into 2020, the average Ghanaian will ask himself, how have I benefited from these government policies that these people came to power and they've put inside? Did I make much benefit from free SHS? Were my children able to go to school for free? Was I able to tap into their? They keep saying that they've had very resounding economic success. The economy is good, it's booming, people are taking advantage of it, the economy is growing. You ask yourself, have you been able to take advantage of that to translate it into money into your pocket? Because if all your policies do not translate to the well-being of the average Ghanaian, then there is a disconnect somewhere, because it's supposed to trickle down and affect the average Ghanaian. But if the average Ghanaian is not feeling the effects of whatever policies you have put in place, then there is a disconnect somewhere. You know, so these are some of the questions that the average Ghanaian will ask themselves. I think also coming into governance in 2020, one of the major concerns that, in our previous podcast I had spoken about was the public sector, as well as structural transformation. And I think that this government have started something on the right path. And even if they do leave governance, I think the next government or the next government that comes subsequently, if they toe the path of that industrialization agenda, it should bode very, very well for the country, because we need to move from a consumer-based economy to a production-based economy. For so long, we've been doing consumer-based economy where we just bring in, we import the raw materials and bring in the ones that they've done what they've added value to it. If we are able to plug in some of these holes in terms of ensuring that some of these little raw materials that we have, we can add value addition to it through industrialization process. You look at their 1D, 1F, some may say it's controversial because some of them don't exist. Some may also say they didn't start from scratch. They just picked up existing factories and also what gave them stimulus packages. For me, whether it was existing company that you gave it a stimulus package or you started from scratch, you have essentially empowered production in the country. When the Central Bank of Governors some years back decided that he was going to cancel subsidies and therefore concentrate on empowering and producing in Nigeria, he did an amazing job with Notary. That was a fertilizer company. where he gave them money to expand and operationalize. It sort of even killed the whole inflow of exporting fertilizer into the country. It was an amazing thing that the Central Bank of Governor did. Where we have land, we have labor, we have the youth, where I think China beats us is the quality of production in terms of the quality of work done. I think we essentially have all these things, and if we're able to tap into it, put the youth, because it's a double-edged sword. You produce in your country, you're able to absorb more people to work in there. You kill employment, you're able to increase your revenue base for government to be able to get more taxes some way, somehow, to be able to achieve whatever policies they have. These things are very, very key. But also, once you look at it in that way, you also have to understand what the implications will be with China, because obviously trade with China shifts now. The balance of the pillars of trade and the balance of trade will shift now, because if you are going to produce more in your country, it means you are going to export less from them. How to balance these vis-a-vis superpowers is one of the things I think this government is doing well, or probably struggling in some sectors with. But you look at that one, you look at the banking sector cleanup. The banking sector cleanup in itself would have been done by the previous government if they didn't go out of power, because it was one of the IMF recommendations. How they would have done it might have been different from how these people, this government, had done it. But essentially, it was a key component, and you realize that. I think we recorded that one in our previous podcast, not to spend much time on it, but it's something that was very important and it needed to be done. Now, if you look at the setting up of the amalgamated trust to sort of support these banks that were put under it, I think the whole essential thing was to adopt the AMCON model, where you had your three factors by which the model was perform non-performing loans, raise minimum capital, and order. I think these were all plans that were done to support the banking sector crisis and the cleanup. The jobs that were lost were unfortunate. I have friends that lost jobs in the banking sector crisis, and it was a sad one, but I think it was necessary. We can argue all day, all long, as to the methodology that was taken. I've also been a strong advocate, and I see signs of it. I've also been a strong advocate of, although, like I said, the central bank's core mandate is monetary stability. And we had this back and forth on Twitter, where I think I was telling you that I want the central bank to engage in the economy more and more, and so as to remove some structural bottlenecks that we have. Because one main key headache of me setting up a factory is I'm coming to set up a juice factory in Ghana. My funding that I have is for a juice factory. I don't want to worry about power. I don't want to worry about roads. I don't want to worry about security and all those things. All these are externalities that I think the government should be able to internalize. And like I gave an example, if you look at Dangote, this is one of his skills, internalizing all externalities. So he brings his own power, water, everything into the enclave, and then he produces. Unfortunately, not all of us have the pockets of Dangote. And so if you look at how government is supporting this 1D, 1F, ensuring you have reliable power supply, making the roads and all that, these are all essential things this government is undertaking that I think even in the previous government also tried to do some things along those lines. Education-wise, I think I don't have to even spell education-wise for you. Free SHS has been a game changer. Again, I've had several arguments with people who think it should be sectionalized or segregated. People who can pay should be allowed to pay and everything. But unfortunately, those are the things that come with a sort of a blanket socialist policy such as free SHS, and the net catches everyone. How it's actually costing a lot of money. It's cost a lot to the government, but I think one key point in the nation's growth is educating its youth. Once your people are semi-educated to some point, even in SHS, you have some requisite skills to tap into. I think free SHS has been a game changer. And if this government is going to win this election in 2020, I think free SHS is what is going to push them off that 50% mark. That alone is a game changer, because I travel a lot, and if you go to the hinterlands, it's just amazing at what they have done. And I'm very happy that the opposition also have come on board to say that when they come to power, they are not going to cancel it, they are going to continue it. I think that cohesion of the two parties agreeing that this is a sine qua non, it's a requisite, important policy that we need in the country is good. The best chances in 2020, I think the leader of the NPP has still has some some goodwill with the people. I think he's seen the patrician. He's seen as he's been an advocacy all his life, fighting for the common man. He speaks maturely. He knows how to handle issues. I think he has. First of all, 2016 there was a bit of goodwill. People sort of warmed up to him. He still has some of the goodwill, although some of the goodwill has suffered some punches here and there with the various corruption scandals that have plagued this recent government. As to whether it has been proven to be corruption-wise or not, none of us, but a scandal is a scandal. And in politics, you know that perception is all that's important. Once people perceive something to be corrupt, they assume it's corrupt. So even if the corruption was not there, I think they have not done so much well in trying to curb that perception of corruption, because your opponent is always going to look for the truth in a dark place with a prejudiced torchlight. He's going to find something that is not there anyways. So that perception in itself is something they have not really done well to fight, because in the past weeks you've all seen these scandals coming up, and it's like you're binge watching a series on Netflix. Every day you wake up to a new one. Most of them are not even true anyway. Some of them are even in court. But like I said, curbing the perception of corruption is one of the things that they have struggled with so far. I mean, yes. So I think we have 40 minutes, so I'm rushing through my thoughts, but I think this captures most of the questions you've answered.
I think you've given quite an extensive overview of most of the issues. I just want to zoom into a few. Going into the 2016 election, I was expecting a runoff, okay, and then an MPP victory following the runoff. I was quite surprised by the extent of the NDC defeat in that election. I wasn't surprised the loss. I was surprised at the extent, in the fact that they barely scratched 45% of the votes. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I want to see from what you said, let's take out policy. So we are not coming at this like some policy analysts or some economists. We are looking at this purely from a political angle. The previous government was plagued, number one, with doomsday. I think that was really the major issue. They had the economy wasn't as good as it was in 2012. In 2012, I projected an NDC victory because the economy was doing well, which is something voters usually reward an incumbent for. Yes.
Right.
And the corruption perception is an issue. And we look at education. Okay, so going into 2012, I think the MPP's free SHS policy was a flagship, and it made that election very competitive. And then going into 2020, the NDC, seeing how popular the free SHS message was, tried to co-opt it um, as a promise that they themselves will bring. And then they included public high schools and all of that. Yes. So I want you to tell me right now, in just like 2 minutes, John Mahama has been trying to give the message that he will not cancel free SHS, he will improve it, okay? And in that way, he's trying to own that message from the MPP, trying to neutralize their advantage with the free SHS message. So take out policy from a purely political angle. How much of an advantage do you think free SHS is going to be for the MPP in this election, given John Mahama's attempt to, one, claim the policy for himself, or his promise to improve it?
Well, I have delved into the NDC manifesto a bit, not too much, but I've delved into it a bit. So I'm speaking more of a socialist stance, maybe quite superficial, not in-depth knowledge into it. But I've heard their commentators also on radio saying they will improve it, but they've not necessarily been able to break down how they are going to improve what exists, what it is now, because all I've heard, and I might be wrong, but all I keep hearing is that they will abolish double track, they will abolish the double track, they will abolish the double track. That is purely an infrastructure problem.
Nanaya, before you go too much into the policy, whether it's possible, whether it's not possible, just I want you to be the ordinary voter, okay? Right. Just is free SHS still a policy you associate solely with the MPP if you are your average voter on the street, or do you think the NDC has made some inroads into the free SHS policy?
No. I don't think so. The free SHS is a flagship policy of the ruling party, the NPP. They brought their free SHS. They have implemented it the way they think. The average Ghanaian who is in school, who finished secondary school, knows that it is Nana's graduates or Nana's graduate and free, just like you have Rollins and Skofor's Gallon and everything. It's something that is associated with Nana Akufo-Addo and the NPP. The NDC in itself might claim it in such a way or form, but I think the average Ghanaian, we can go and take a normal poll on the street today, pull in the next 200 people, everybody will associate free SHS with MPP. Not a single person will do with NDC. And so, yes, I think I was delving too much into the policy in the previous session.
But I think politics, since we don't have too much time.
Yes. I think it's a full.
Let me come in with another issue, which is very peculiar to this election, and that is the coronavirus pandemic. Right. In terms of how the government has handled it, from a purely political perspective, let me give my thoughts. I think the coronavirus pandemic, my perspective is when it started, we didn't take it too seriously. Probably the only political angle was whether the government should bring the students from China or not. And the opposition made some headway in bashing the government for abandoning the students and whatnot. And then I think the advantage politically moved to the government when they started the testing. We saw how good Noguchi was doing, how well Noguchi was doing, showing that we had the capacity to actually manage a pandemic. And we went through the lockdown period. We had the interventions such as free water, 50% electricity. I think all of that put the government on a very good pedestal in terms of people's perceptions of their competence. But then we had this issue of one, NHIS, and then two, the new voters register, which was all happening within a pandemic. And I think that politically affected the government because people's perception was that they were too concerned about winning and they were willing to risk the lives of Ghanaians to win an election, in that they needed a whole new register. And then we went post that to the period where most Ghanaians, unfortunately, are not taking the pandemic seriously. And it's almost like it's now a non-issue. But I think there are still some voters who would consider the pandemic and the government's handling of the pandemic as a major issue. So from your perspective, what do you think, first of all, where do you think the government stands, the perception of people's perception of the government's competence in handling the coronavirus pandemic? Where do you think it stands right now, and how do you think that is going to affect people's decision when it comes to vote?
Well, I think in the beginning, like you said, there was some laxity in the way the approach was early March. But I think they realized the seriousness of it, although maybe they had started making plans towards it, but we could not see it. And, we are very visual people, so we want to see the government doing things. I mean, speaking with some of them, they had already started making plans for the shutdown and for the lockdown, closing of the airports and all that. I think the handling of the coronavirus pandemic has been, if you ask me to score, within the first few months of lockdown, I would score the government at 80%. One, because it brought out one of the exemplary leaderships of Nana Akufo-Addo in terms of assuring the nation that he had it under control. I think if any government was there, Mahama would have probably done same. When you go to assurance in words is you can give all your florid speeches, but he backed his florid speeches with actions, locking down the country, disinfecting the marketplaces, and providing hot meals for the poor people, providing dry meals. Civil service organizations also got in there, the religious bodies got in there. It was a very solid, concerted effort by all and sundry to come on board to help us. Now, what people fail to understand, and when I said free water, when the president said free water and free ECG, people were like, oh, it's not needed. And I asked one question to a friend: if I ask you to take me to the house of a privileged person, whose house will you not take me to? Because someone has a bed, someone doesn't even have a bed. And people fail to understand that when we look at, if you're looking at, what do you call it, social infrastructure in this country, Ghana is not one country. If you are looking at social infrastructure in itself, Ghana is not one country. Poverty rates in the south is probably 15%. If you go to the north, it's 78%. So a reduction in ECG, 50%, is a livelihood issue for the average Ghanaian. I think that also won him some accolades. And everybody was happy. He was very firm and strong with assuring the country that, hey, I have this under control, and it was back. I also feel like there are things that some of the experts warned us about that maybe they didn't take for I mean, if you look at this COVID tracker app, I really do not know why it was done. Right? I don't, that's my personal opinion. But then again, whatever purposes they sought to achieve with that, I'm yet to see. I'm yet to see. I could be proven wrong, but I don't think it was something of importance as it stands. Their contact tracing was spot on, although later on you had some contact people complaining that they are no more doing contact tracing, people have not been paid. But then we are an African country, getting into middle income African country, we are always plagued with money issues. So in as much as the government will want to put money in there, you realize it's going to run out in a while. Now, in terms of this voter registration and election exercise, for me, I don't think you can score any political points with moral absolutism. And you also need to understand that sometimes you have to be able to narrow and cross out the path between intelligent discourse and then practical politics. We had an election to do. We had a new voters register to essentially compile. Some may argue whether the new voters register was important or not. But I think the Supreme Court is we have what the law says. That's the Constitution. We have what the law says, and we have what the court says, which is essentially what the law is. So I'm not going to be a master of jurisprudence or constitutionalism, but I think the Supreme Court ruled that essentially we did need a new voters register. You may argue with it all you want, but I'm taking the Supreme Court ruling. And if that's the case, it had to be done. So every single Ghanaian had to be enrolled to vote. The opposition was not willing to call off the election. They say that let this man continue. Neither was everybody wants to vote. They wanted to vote. The opposition wants to get rid of this government. The government wants to continue. None of them actually sat back and said, you know what, okay, we are suffering a crisis, so therefore let us allow this man or let's do. Everybody wants power at the end of the day. And if you look at how they were shouting and screaming on top of their voices, when the time came, they were the ones mobilizing their base to go and register, so that they can have the power to vote out the government if it comes. Practical politics, moral absolutism, ethical absolutism, they don't go hand in hand. Once you're able to differentiate between the two, you would understand what politics is in nature. I think most of the times, most of us live in a very utopian mindset where they think everything should be as it is. But when you're dealing with issues of governance, you're dealing with power, you're dealing with politics, there are some green areas that you have to cross. And I think these are some of the things that did inform them. Yes, they did suffer some flack in terms of everybody saying that, we knew, that is why you've opened it. But I mean, it's over. The registration is over and all that. And the same people who were saying that, hey, we see, they are the ones who are going to town the most. Everywhere is packed every evening now. They're not staying at home. And so because of that, we are having a resurgence of the numbers coming up again. People are not taking the safety protocols very well. For me, I think the average Ghanaian is innately indisciplined. That's how I'll put it. I think the average Ghanaian is innately corrupt. The average Ghanaian is innately indisciplined. But scoring them in terms of this corona handling, I think I'll give them a 70% so far. I would like to see the decisions that are taken after 7th December with regards to this coronavirus. It would affirm some personal questions I have in my head, which I can't share now, on the handling the government's decision to do certain things in the coronavirus era.
Okay. Thanks for that analysis on the coronavirus handling. I want to go to another issue really quick, which is probably the most topical issue now. It has to do with corruption, specifically with the resignation of the Special Prosecutor Martin Amidu, and what that means for the fight against corruption, specifically people's thoughts of President Anado's commitment to fighting corruption. And I want to tie this in with another issue, which is the relationship of the government with civil society. Now, as someone coming from civil society, I can tell you that in 2016, or basically in the whole term of the last government, the relationship with civil society wasn't the best. We had lots of allegations from the government that civil society was in cahoots with the opposition, and all the comments they were passing about whether the doomsaw or the economic crisis or corruption, whatever, was just a way to improve the chances of the MPP in the 2016 elections. And then we come to Nanado's term as president, where he started with some goodwill from civil society, specifically people like Occupy Ghana, which was like a whole coalition of several civil society organizations. And but now what we see is there is that friction that we saw under the previous government. We are seeing that friction again with civil society. An example has to do with the handling of the pandemic. I do not want us to go back to the pandemic, but I'm just talking about some of the criticisms that have come from civil society to the government. The handling of the pandemic, the Ejapa royalties deal. I do not want us to get into Ejapa since it's too broad, but and then corruption. We are seeing this tension with civil society developing again, and I think we've probably seen it most with Imani. That is probably where the tension is coming from the most. And I want to ask you, as you said, perception is the most important thing. And if the voters, taking a cue from civil society, see that the government is not doing well in the fight against corruption, which was the same perception under the previous government that got them out. I want you to tell me from a purely political perspective, do you think the MPP still has an advantage on the corruption issue? Do you think the NDC now has an advantage, especially with the resignation of Martin Amidu and civil societies thinking that the government is not doing well in the fight against corruption? Or do you think that the voter is going to go, NDC was corrupt, MPP is corrupt, so that is not an issue for me, or I'm considering going third party?
I've had some back and forth with Imani on Twitter myself on some issues, but like I said, civil society and governance, they all have their complex, multifaceted trajectory. But at the end of the day, their importance to each other in terms of governance is undeniable. I've stated previously that this government had goodwill coming into power. They still maintain some goodwill. And so, yes, have they been treated with some sort of kid gloves in terms of civil society? Yes, to some extent and all that. But the very nature of civil society is to provide alternative, if I'm wrong, solutions and policies, and also complement what the country or the government's policies are. But if you look at some of the civil societies, right from the word go, for instance, free SHS, some of them did not give it a dog's chance. Some were invited to give ways to make it better. They just didn't give it a dog's chance. I think civil societies and governments should be able to find a common ground to work. Because both if you look at recently what is happening with Imani has been very, very vocal on some government policies, sometimes almost as if they are political paid people to sort of, that's how the other government, the ruling government probably perceives them. But I think it's all for the betterment of the country. What we also need to understand is that Imani and the civil society organizations are not a repository of knowledge. There are equally knowledgeable people on the other side in government. There are equally knowledgeable people in NDC. There are equally knowledgeable in DPP. But most civil societies that we have in the country have adopted a siege mentality. It's a no Scotsman's fallacy. If you don't agree with the way I think or speak like the way we do, then we have to ban you. Then you have to take us. What we have said is final. I don't see much room for compromising. It's either you are left or you are right. And so when you do that, you would always be at loggerheads with the ruling government or the opposition in terms of its policies. Tell me how I can make free SHS better. Tell me how I can make Ejapa better. Tell me how I can make building 8 hospitals better. Tell me how I can make the big push that Mahama is advocating for. Tell me how I can make it better. Because I have policy analysts just like Imani, and I've brought down some policies. You can't tell me that everything I've said here is wrong and yours is right. And that is what we've been seeing of late. I mean, it was always a middle ground in the beginning. I don't know where the hostility started coming from, at what point that adopted everybody to stand at opposite ends of the trajectory. I believe their importance to governance is undeniable, and civil societies play a key role. One of such amazing civil societies we have in Ghana is CDD, Imani, ISODEC, ASEP. ASEP is a special civil service organization to my heart because of my love in energy. So you understand, I take them very seriously. And so I think what we need to do is to find a balance on how to work together. It should not always be that this is what I think. If it's not right, it's wrong. Then whatever you have put on the table, I will not adopt it. Same happened with the voters issue, where you had so many people doing the Q theory, the this theory, the that theory, but essentially they were all proven wrong in there. Now the goalpost shift to BVDs. It's not correct. It's not right. Yes, you're not going to have a perfect harmony. You're not going to have everything moving in correct and vivid syncopation in the right way or together. There's going to be some lapses here and there. Civil society organizations are supposed to tell us how we can make things better, not necessarily be at war with the government. And if they happen to do it in 2012 to 2016, it's not right. And so if they are happy to do it in 2016, 2020, I think we should find some common ground to work with. When it comes to the issue of the OSP, I have a very soft spot for Martin Amidu. I have a very, very soft spot for Martin Amidu. So I find the events that have happened recently very troubling. I've seen the responses to you see, Martin Amidu has always been the beacon of corruption, anti-corruption. So once the beacon of anti-corruption starts to give an indication that this particular person who's lit my beacon is trying to pour water onto my beacon, therefore I do not have the fire to fight it anymore, it causes grave concern for whoever it is in terms of the fight against corruption. But I think I'm not going to delve into it. We've seen his letter to the government. We've seen the government's response. For now, we can leave that for discussion, and everyone, we can have conjecture in there. Everybody can think what he wants to think about it. I personally feel he should not have quit, because if it is now that you have seen the cases of corruption, this is how you go after it. I mean, so how he can. Martin Amidu has been in government since what? A long time. I don't think this is the first time. I don't know how credible the threats to his life is or are. I don't know, but I don't think this is going to be the first time he's had a threat on his life. I think when he didn't have any political power backing him and he was alone, he was still fighting the vested interests. who could snap their finger and you could be eliminated. And so that is it. Now, I said something some months back about the average Ghanaian lacking integrity, because what I say is that a political person was the average Ghanaian before he assumed public office. If he didn't have integrity when he was the average Ghanaian, there's no point in him getting integrity now that he has power. I personally believe that the moral and ethical compass of the average Ghanaian has been completely ossified into utter uselessness. We do not, through these acts of corruption, you see, now certain little acts of corruption actually affects us. I made this indication to you that I am not a big fan of debt to GDP ratio. I'm just digressing into some bit of economics. I think what we need to look at is revenue to GDP in terms of the tax base. Now, I gave you an example in our last podcast that if you go to the countries that are high on the transparency index in terms of these are less corrupt countries, there is one key factor that you see amongst all of them. So you go to countries like Norway, Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, and you realize that they are doing very well on the transparency index in terms of anti-corruption. When you go and you look at their revenue to GDP, you realize that these are people who are also scoring very high on revenue to GDP, just because public sector corruption is something that does not thrive there. So the government is able to get more of their tax base and resources, and therefore being able to service whatever debts that they have. So people who are giving you out capital loans and all that should more be concentrated on the government's revenue to GDP. The key issue there is corruption. That word, corruption. It's something that is in there. And if you look at us, we are always very low on the Transparency Index International in terms of corruption. But when you go to our tax to revenue, we are very high there in terms of corruption, but it's quite low when it comes to the revenue index. And it's mainly public sector. And these corrupt practices, I'm not going to sit here and pretend as if corruption is not innate in public sector. It is innate in there. And these people are not political appointees. These are your chief directors and your general managers, and in there, they are corrupt. And so I think we will do whatever we have to do to fight against corruption, but there should be a systematic and a very serious structural change in the way we approach things. Other than that, look at the scandals that has been plaguing us. I mean, just listen to some of them, and you realize that the people who are undertaking these scandals are sometimes the people who back the politicians. They are the ones in civil service. Civil service is a very, very important part of governance. So if you have a civil service architecture where 50% is probably corrupt, there's no way on earth the government is going to do well. And how to eliminate corruption is probably digitalizing the economy, putting less reliance on face-to-face interactions, less reliance on money exchanging hands, because everything is now digitalized and it's centered at a server place. And I think this government has started with that. I think previous opposition government also started some digitalizing agenda. And I hope they continue with these things, because if things are digitalized, it's very difficult to steal. We still have a lot of face-to-face interaction. You paying duties, you go and see them, you sit here, you do that. It's easy for people to get corrupted with these things. So are we losing the fight against corruption? I don't think we ever stood a chance. I think we've made some we've made some impressive feats, but those are what we call when the stars are veiled. You think you are seeing it, but I think we are not doing well against the fight against corruption. It's been like this for a very long time, and each government comes and does one or two, but I think it is more of a psychological thing with the average Ghanaian. We need to work on the average Ghanaian's mindset against corruption. That is what will translate. Like I've always said, the politician was a normal citizen. I'm sitting here. The next 2 years, 5 years, who knows? I'll be in power. If I'm corrupt today, as I'm sitting here without power, how do I change when I get power? It doesn't. So we need to work on the normal Ghanaian, the down one first. Try and build their moral compass against corruption and ethical compass. It's one of the few things that we need to work on. But everybody has been missing the point. People have looked at, you see, when you have a weak structure and you put it on steroids, it will perform to a bit and it will fail. I gave that analogy of having a 1975 Mazda. When you put nitro in it and you put it on the motorway, you speed it up. By the time you reach halfway, the car is torn because the structure cannot contain the force of the nitro. You have a 2016, 2018 Range Rover, you put in nitro, you put it on a motorway, you're going to gas it up and speed it up. That is the structure can hold the force. Once we keep, that's what governments have done. They need structural transformation. They don't do it. They come and then they pump money into an already dead structure. It's just like you're pumping steroids into something that doesn't work. At the end of the day, yes, it's going to perform, but you realize that it's going to perform to a certain point and it's not going to work anymore. So we need structural transformation and getting rid of some of these things.
Nanaya, thank you. I think we need to take one policy issue and just, totally dissect it, because I see you have lots of thoughts on them, lots of ideas, which we will need time to talk about. But we
Yes, yes.
have roughly 5 minutes to wrap up this discussion. So I just want to look at if you were given the opportunity, okay, to advise any political party. So we are going to take MPP, NDC, PPP. You are a political consultant. Okay, you have about 2 weeks to win an election. You need to craft messages, okay, on point, targeted messages to improve your chances. I need you in 30 seconds for each party or 1 minute for each party, starting with the governing MPP. What are you going to tell the MPP's campaign to focus on? After that, what are you going to tell the NDC's campaign to focus on if they want to recapture power? And finally, what would you tell the PPP if they want to pull an upset by getting rid of the two legacy parties and bringing in some change?
I think I would essentially tell the NPP not to engage in a political back and forth with the NDC in terms of they should just concentrate on their free SHS, one district, one factory, NAPCO, NBSS. I just concentrate on what you have done. You've achieved a lot. Concentrate on it. Don't engage in a political banter of who is bad, who is worse, because the average Ghanaian knows that all politicians are the same. So just concentrate on what you have done. If I had to speak with the NDC, I would tell them, you know what, you have a dog's chance, but now you have some issues of corruption that are being brought up. Hone in on that one, because you don't have any chance of winning, to some extent, of winning the election. So how do you prevent people from going out to win? By creating the impression that they are all the same, so that they suffer some atrophy here, and then you can mobilize your base to go and make up for that one. When it comes to PPP and the smaller parties, I don't have any advice for them because I don't know how much of a difference they would make. But yeah, I mean, let's see. I hope they are able to do well. But there isn't much to say to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Nanayao. I would just say for PPP and other parties, I can say I speak for many Ghanaians when I say that people want change. It's just that people are not sure. You know, I think most Ghanaians are like, okay, I am not satisfied with the MPP, but I don't want the NDC to win, and therefore I'm going to vote MPP if I'm not satisfied. And somebody may be like, I do not want the NDC, but I like the MPP even less. So even though my ideal situation would be that a third party should be in power, I would rather vote NDC than risking MPP winning. So the third parties, it's not impossible. You just need to craft messages consistently over the whole term of the government. One thing we see is that sometimes we only see third parties a few months to elections, which is not the best. We need them consistently providing an alternative. Okay, don't worry if you do not win. Consistently provide an alternative, a common sense alternative between these two major parties we have. And you never know. One day you could pull off a Macron or something. You never know what will happen. But thank you very much, Nanayao. Thank you to all of you watching or listening. We haven't been consistent in our recording, but going into the elections, we want to bring you about one or two more discussions, and then we'll have a post election analysis, see the results, maybe go into some constituencies and look at what issues tilted the results one way or the other. My name is Jerome Kuseh. I'm on Twitter at Read Jerome. My blog is cdtalk.com. And you can find me online. Just search Read Jerome. You'll see me online.
I am Nanaya Asante. My handle is the Achim Mafia. I don't have a blog yet. I post my articles on Jerome's blog, so I have 1 or 2 articles on there, what you can go and read in terms of the growth model for Africa and all that. Thank you.
And see you soon.
See you.